Some people do not lose everything in a single day. They lose it one quiet compromise at a time until the only thing they have left is the hope that someone will finally notice. At exactly 2:17 on a cold October morning, rain drummed steadily against the roof of an aging blue SUV parked beneath a flickering light in the corner of a McDonald's parking lot outside Seattle, Washington. Most drivers passed without looking twice. A few assumed the vehicle belonged to a traveler resting before another long drive. Nobody imagined that the old sport utility vehicle had become the only home a mother and her 3 children had left. Inside, the windows were covered with soft fog from sleeping breaths. 11-year-old Noah Carter quietly opened his eyes before anyone else. Careful not to wake his younger brother or sister, he slipped from beneath a faded blanket and climbed over a stack of neatly folded backpacks. 7-year-old Lily hugged a worn stuffed rabbit whose missing button eye had been replaced with blue thread. 5-year-old Ben slept with a small green plastic dinosaur pressed tightly against his chest. Their mother, Emily Carter, remained asleep behind the steering wheel. Her head rested gently against the window while one hand still held a small notebook filled with carefully written numbers. Every page contained impossible choices. Gas. Medicine. School lunch. Laundry. Every dollar had already been promised before it was earned. Noah quietly stepped outside into the chilly rain carrying an empty reusable bottle. He walked toward the restaurant entrance where an outdoor water station remained available overnight. As he filled the bottle, a black luxury sedan slowly entered the nearly empty parking lot. Daniel Brooks had just finished a late meeting with regional managers after visiting several franchise locations across western Washington. He usually drove himself after long nights because silence helped him think more clearly than any expensive office ever could. As he locked his car, he noticed the young boy standing alone beneath the dim parking lot lights. There was something unusual about seeing a child awake at that hour with no adult nearby. Daniel approached carefully, leaving enough distance so he would not frighten him. He smiled politely and asked if everything was all right. Noah smiled back with remarkable confidence for someone so young. He answered that his family was camping for a little while because his mother wanted them to have an adventure before winter became too cold. The answer sounded rehearsed, almost cheerful, yet it carried a sadness no child should have learned to hide. Daniel thanked him and began walking toward the restaurant, but something made him glance once more toward the old SUV. Through the windshield he saw a woman asleep in the driver's seat, her face marked by exhaustion rather than comfort. 3 backpacks hung neatly behind the front seats. Children's shoes rested in perfect rows on the floor. Folded blankets replaced what should have been beds. Nothing inside looked careless. Everything looked organized with the quiet discipline of someone trying desperately to protect normal life from falling apart. A sudden breeze shifted the notebook resting on Emily's lap, exposing one unfinished page through the windshield. Daniel could not read every word from where he stood, but 3 lines remained painfully clear beneath the parking lot light. Gas. Ben's medicine. School lunch. Beside each item sat small numbers written with careful precision. He understood immediately that whoever owned that notebook had already reached the point where every decision meant giving something else up. Standing alone in the rain, Daniel realized the woman inside that old vehicle was not choosing what to buy tomorrow. She was choosing which necessity her children would have to live without before the sun came up. The first rays of morning slowly pushed the rain clouds away, leaving tiny drops of water sparkling across the parking lot like scattered pieces of glass. Emily Carter woke with a quiet gasp, immediately checking the back seat before allowing herself to breathe normally. Noah was already sitting upright with a reusable bottle beside him. Lily still hugged her worn rabbit, and Ben remained asleep beneath the faded blanket with his little green dinosaur tucked safely beneath his arm. Emily smiled with relief. Every new morning began with the same silent promise. As long as her children woke feeling safe, she could endure another day. She folded every blanket with careful precision, stacked each pillow against the rear window, and transformed the crowded SUV into something that looked less like a bedroom and more like an ordinary family vehicle. She believed dignity lived inside the smallest habits. The children changed into clean school clothes that Emily had washed the evening before at a nearby laundromat. Their outfits were simple, but every shirt was neatly pressed by hand, every shoelace tied correctly, and every backpack carefully organized. Before anyone stepped outside, Emily brushed Lily's hair, straightened Noah's collar, and wiped a tiny stain from Ben's sleeve with a damp paper towel she had saved from the previous afternoon. No passerby would ever guess they had spent the night inside a parking lot. They entered the McDonald's restaurant just after 6 o'clock, blending quietly with early commuters collecting breakfast before work. Emily purchased a single breakfast sandwich and one small cup of oatmeal using carefully counted bills and loose coins. She carried the tray to a corner table where the children waited patiently without complaint. Noah immediately divided the sandwich into for equal pieces using a plastic knife. Lily handed the largest piece toward her mother, but Emily smiled gently and pushed it back across the table. She insisted that she had eaten while everyone else was still asleep. The children accepted her answer because they wanted to believe it, even though Noah quietly noticed the untouched coffee cup that served as her entire breakfast almost every morning. Daniel Brooks entered through another doorway a few minutes later, dressed simply beneath a dark rain jacket instead of the tailored suit he had worn the previous night. None of the employees recognized him immediately, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He ordered black coffee, then chose a table where he could observe without interrupting. He watched Emily thank the cashier by name, clear the table after finishing, and carefully separate every unused napkin into a clean stack for later. As the family prepared to leave, an elderly military veteran accidentally dropped his wooden cane near the entrance. Before anyone else reacted, Emily crossed the room, picked it up with both hands, and offered it back with quiet respect. She did not know the man. She did not expect anything in return. She simply smiled and wished him a good morning before gathering her children. Moments later, another customer rushed outside after realizing a wallet had slipped from a coat pocket. Emily had already found it beneath a chair. She returned it immediately without opening it or asking what might be inside. The grateful customer reached for several folded bills, but Emily politely declined with a gentle shake of her head. She thanked him anyway and led her children toward the parking lot. Daniel remained seated, watching the old SUV disappear beyond the traffic light. Around him, people carried expensive phones, designer handbags, polished briefcases, and fresh coffee without giving a second thought to what they owned. Yet the woman who had almost nothing had quietly given away more kindness before 7 o'clock that morning than most people managed in an entire week, and for the first time in many years, Daniel found himself wondering whether the richest person in that parking lot had never stepped out of the luxury sedan at all. For the next 4 mornings, Daniel Brooks arrived before sunrise without telling anyone why. His executives believed he was inspecting restaurant operations across the region, but he rarely looked at the financial reports waiting inside his briefcase. Instead, his attention drifted toward the familiar blue SUV parked beneath the same corner light. Emily Carter never occupied more space than she needed. She always chose the farthest parking spot, always kept the area spotless, and always left before the morning rush reached its busiest hour. It was as though she feared becoming an inconvenience to people who had no idea she existed. Daniel found himself noticing details that most people would never see. Every afternoon, fresh library books appeared on the dashboard beside Lily's stuffed rabbit. Every evening, Noah carefully completed his homework beneath the glow of a small rechargeable lantern while Emily quietly reviewed job listings on an aging laptop with a cracked corner. Ben laughed whenever a passing airplane crossed the evening sky, pretending each one carried explorers instead of passengers. Despite everything they lacked, the children still found reasons to smile, and Emily protected those moments with remarkable determination. Daniel asked his legal department to perform only a standard public records search, refusing to access anything private or confidential. He wanted facts, not gossip. The report arrived the following afternoon. Emily had spent nearly 8 years working as a patient intake coordinator at a neighborhood medical clinic. Every performance review described her as dependable, compassionate, and exceptionally organized. Then everything changed. Her husband, Michael Carter, had been diagnosed with an aggressive illness that required months of treatment. Insurance covered part of the expenses, but not enough. Medical bills grew faster than savings disappeared. After Michael passed away, Emily sold nearly everything she owned to keep making mortgage payments until the numbers finally became impossible. There were no bankruptcies caused by reckless spending, no criminal records, no unpaid taxes, no history of dishonesty. There was only one tragedy followed by hundreds of impossible financial decisions. Another document quietly caught Daniel's attention. Nearly 2 years earlier, Emily had found a wallet containing several $1,000s in cash outside a grocery store. Surveillance cameras confirmed she immediately turned it over to customer service without removing a single bill. The grateful owner later offered her a generous reward, but she declined because, according to the incident report, she wanted her children to grow up believing honesty should never depend upon the amount of money involved. Daniel slowly closed the folder and stared through his office window for several long minutes. Success had introduced him to countless talented people, but genuine integrity had become surprisingly rare. Late that afternoon, heavy rain returned to Seattle just as school dismissal ended. Emily picked up the children and returned to the parking lot after another unsuccessful interview. She smiled through obvious exhaustion while helping Ben climb into the SUV. When she turned the key, the engine hesitated before coughing once and falling silent. She tried again. Nothing. Noah quietly looked at the fuel gauge before lowering his eyes. Emily rested both hands on the steering wheel without saying a word. She knew exactly how much money remained inside her wallet, and it was not enough to pay for both repairs and the medicine waiting at the pharmacy for Ben's lingering cough. The rain became heavier as other vehicles slowly pulled away one after another. Daniel had been walking toward his own car when the sound of the struggling engine reached him across the nearly empty parking lot. He stopped, watching the family through the curtain of falling rain. Emily looked up at exactly the same moment, and for the first time since that cold October night, she realized the quiet stranger had been noticing far more than she had ever imagined. Emily Carter stepped out of the SUV before the stranger could come any closer. Rain soaked her navy cardigan within seconds, but she closed the driver's door quietly so the children would not hear the conversation. Noah watched through the fogged windshield while Lily hugged her worn rabbit a little tighter and Ben traced tiny circles across the glass with one finger. Daniel Brooks stopped several feet away, careful to leave enough space for her to decide whether she wanted to continue the conversation. He did not introduce himself with a title or a business card. He simply looked at the silent vehicle before meeting Emily's tired eyes. "May I help?" he asked gently. Emily studied him for several long seconds. There was kindness in his voice, but kindness alone was no longer enough to erase months of disappointment. She had learned that promises were often easier to give than to keep. "My children are not a charity project," she replied quietly. "I appreciate your concern, but we will figure this out." Daniel nodded without taking another step forward. "I understand," he answered. "Then let me ask a different question. What would fair help look like to you?" The unexpected response caught Emily by surprise. Most people either insisted on helping their own way or walked away entirely. This man did neither. She glanced back toward the SUV before speaking again. "Fair help does not make my children feel like they owe someone for being poor." Daniel listened without interrupting. "No cash," she continued. "No expensive hotel room. No photographs. No social media posts. No speeches about changing our lives." A small smile appeared on Daniel's face. "Agreed." Emily folded her arms against the cold rain. "If the vehicle can be repaired, I will pay the mechanic when I am able. If the children need breakfast tomorrow, I will accept food because children should never carry adult burdens. And if you know about a job opening, I will apply like everyone else. Nothing more." Daniel extended his hand, not to shake hers but simply as a gesture of agreement. "That sounds fair." He made one phone call to a local mechanic he had trusted for years. There was no mention of money, influence, or ownership. He only explained that a family with young children had a disabled vehicle and asked whether someone could stop by before the end of the afternoon. Less than 20 minutes later, an older mechanic named Frank arrived with a service truck. After inspecting the SUV, he smiled kindly toward Emily. Your battery is worn out and one terminal has heavy corrosion. The engine itself is fine. Emily quietly asked how much the repair would cost. Frank looked toward Daniel, who simply shook his head almost imperceptibly before turning away. There is a community assistance fund that covers situations like this, Frank explained. Someone already made arrangements. Emily hesitated, uncertain whether to believe him, but Frank handed her an official receipt showing the repair had been covered through a local charitable maintenance program that Daniel privately supported every year without attaching his name to it. While the battery was being replaced, Daniel walked inside the restaurant and returned carrying for warm breakfast, meals and one extra cup of coffee. He placed the bags on a nearby picnic table instead of handing them directly to Emily. For the children, he said. Ben climbed out of the SUV and smiled at the smell of hot pancakes. Lily looked toward her mother for permission before reaching for the bag. Noah remained quietly beside Emily, watching the stranger with thoughtful eyes. "Are you rich?" Ben suddenly asked with innocent curiosity. Daniel laughed softly before answering. "I have been fortunate in business." Ben tilted his head. "Then why are you standing out here in the rain with us?" Daniel looked across the parking lot for a brief moment before meeting the little boy's eyes again. "Because a long time ago," he said quietly, "I forgot what it felt like to need another human being, and I think I am finally starting to remember." The following morning arrived beneath clear skies for the first time in nearly a week, and the blue SUV started with a smooth, steady engine that made Ben clap his hands with excitement. Emily Carter rested both hands on the steering wheel for a brief moment before whispering a quiet thank you to herself. She was grateful for the repaired vehicle, but she also reminded herself that gratitude should never become dependence. She still needed work, stability, and a future that belonged to her children rather than to chance. After dropping Noah, Lily, and Ben at school, she drove to the address Frank had written on the back of a business card. It was an employment interview for an open customer service position at one of the largest McDonald's restaurants in the area. Emily wore the same white blouse and navy cardigan she had carefully washed and pressed the night before. They were not expensive clothes, but they were spotless. Before entering the building, she took one deep breath and quietly repeated the promise she had made after Michael passed away. No matter how difficult life became, she would always walk into every opportunity with dignity instead of desperation. Inside the restaurant, employees prepared for the lunch rush while customers filled the dining room with ordinary conversations that somehow made the place feel comforting. Emily introduced herself at the front counter and was escorted to a small office near the back of the building. As she waited, she noticed framed photographs showing years of community events, employee celebrations, scholarship programs, and local charity partnerships. One large photograph near the office entrance immediately caught her attention. Her heart nearly stopped. Standing in the center of the picture, smiling beside restaurant managers and local officials, was the same quiet man who had stood in the rain with her family only one day earlier. Daniel Brooks. Beneath the photograph, a polished plaque identified him as the owner of the regional franchise group. Emily stared at the image in complete silence. She suddenly understood why the employees had greeted him so respectfully during his earlier visits. He had never mentioned his position. He had never used his influence. He had simply listened. The realization filled her with unexpected discomfort. She stood, picked up her folder, and quietly turned toward the exit. She could not accept a position that might exist only because someone powerful felt sorry for her. Before she reached the front door, Daniel entered from another hallway carrying a folder of business reports. He noticed the concern in her expression immediately. "You are leaving," he said gently. Emily nodded. "I cannot accept a job that was handed to me because of sympathy." Daniel remained calm. "Then do not accept one." Emily looked at him with confusion. He continued, "I do not interview hourly employees, and I do not decide who gets hired. That responsibility belongs to the management team. I only made certain you learned there was an opening. Everything else depends entirely on your qualifications." Emily searched his face for any sign that he was simply trying to reassure her, but she found none. His expression remained steady and sincere. If they decide I am not the right person, she asked. Then you will leave knowing you earned an honest answer, Daniel replied. And if they decide you are the right person, you will know you earned that as well. Emily slowly returned to the waiting area. The interview began a few minutes later, with 2 managers and a human resources representative asking thoughtful questions about customer service, conflict resolution, teamwork, and handling difficult situations. She answered every question honestly, never mentioning the parking lot or the previous night's conversation. Halfway through the interview, an elderly customer became confused while searching for his wallet near the ordering kiosk. Without hesitation, Emily politely excused herself, helped him gather his belongings, patiently explained the self-order screen, and walked him back to the counter before quietly returning to finish the interview. None of the managers interrupted her. They simply exchanged silent glances before continuing their questions. Outside the office, Daniel watched through the glass for only a moment before walking away. He did not need to influence the decision. He had already seen exactly what the interview panel was beginning to discover for themselves. 3 days later, Emily Carter received the phone call while waiting in the elementary school pickup line. The hiring manager congratulated her and offered her the customer service position beginning the following Monday. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment before thanking the manager with a steady voice. She did not celebrate until she hung up the phone and looked into the rearview mirror. Noah noticed the tears gathering in her eyes first. "Mom," he asked softly. Emily smiled through them. "We have a job." Lily clapped happily while Ben raised his little dinosaur into the air as though it had won a championship. The joy inside the old SUV was quiet, genuine, and deeply earned. On her first morning of work, Emily arrived 30 minutes early. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her hair carefully tied back, and every movement reflected the same discipline she had practiced throughout the hardest months of her life. She greeted every coworker politely, learned names quickly, asked thoughtful questions, and treated each customer with the same respect whether they ordered a single coffee or breakfast for an entire family. Within 2 weeks, regular customers began recognizing her warm smile. Parents appreciated her patience with children. Elderly guests remembered how she carried trays without being asked. Employees discovered that she never complained about difficult assignments and always volunteered to help clean before going home. Daniel Brooks visited the restaurant several times during those weeks, but he never interrupted her work or treated her differently from anyone else. If they crossed paths, they exchanged nothing more than a polite greeting. Emily appreciated that distance because it reminded everyone, including herself, that she had earned her place. Not everyone shared that opinion. Melissa Grant, the shift supervisor, quietly watched the growing praise surrounding the newest employee. Melissa had spent years working long hours to build her reputation, and although she was skilled at managing busy shifts, she often measured her own value by comparing herself with others. Every compliment directed toward Emily felt like one less compliment available for her. She began assigning Emily the busiest stations during lunch rushes, expecting mistakes that never came. Emily simply thanked her for the assignments and continued working with calm efficiency. The lack of complaints only deepened Melissa's frustration. Toward the end of November, the restaurant launched its annual fundraising campaign for Ronald McDonald House Charities. A brightly decorated donation box stood beside every register, and customers generously contributed spare change and folded bills throughout each day. Emily carefully followed every procedure exactly as she had been trained. Whenever a donation box became full, she called a supervisor before moving it, signed the required log, and made certain another employee witnessed every transfer. She understood that trust was built through small habits repeated consistently. One rainy Friday evening, after the dinner rush finally slowed, Melissa gathered the donation boxes for the nightly count. A few minutes later, confusion spread through the office. The total did not match the collection log. Several $100s appeared to be missing. Managers immediately began reviewing paperwork while employees exchanged nervous glances across the kitchen. Melissa looked toward the signature sheet, paused for a long moment, and then quietly announced that the last employee to handle the largest donation box before it reached the office had been Emily Carter. The room became uncomfortably silent. Emily looked at the paperwork resting on the desk before lifting her eyes toward Melissa. She did not defend herself with anger or accuse anyone else. Her voice remained calm despite the weight of every uncertain stare surrounding her. "Please check everything," she said softly. "If I made a mistake, I want to understand it. If I did not, then the truth is somewhere in the records." At that same moment, Daniel received a brief phone call informing him that an unexplained discrepancy had been discovered in the charity collection. He listened without interruption before giving only one instruction. "Do not reach conclusions," he said evenly. "We investigate evidence, not people." The following morning, the restaurant felt unusually quiet even though customers continued arriving for breakfast as they always had. Rumors traveled much faster than facts, and Emily Carter could feel uncertain glances following her wherever she worked. Some co-workers smiled politely while others avoided eye contact altogether. She understood how quickly trust could disappear when questions remained unanswered. Instead of defending herself to everyone who would listen, she focused on the only thing she could control. She greeted every customer with the same warm smile, prepared every order carefully, and followed every procedure exactly as she had from her first day. Daniel Brooks arrived shortly after 9 o'clock and walked directly into the management office. He reviewed the donation logs, employee signatures, register reports, and security schedules without saying more than a few words. Every document told only part of the story. The donation records confirmed that Emily had signed the transfer form correctly. Another employee had witnessed the sealed collection box before it entered the office. Yet the final count still showed several $100s missing. Melissa Grant quietly repeated that Emily had been the last employee to carry the largest donation box from the front counter. Daniel listened carefully without interrupting. When Melissa finished speaking, he simply asked one question. "Did anyone personally see the box opened before the official count began?" The room fell silent. No one had. Daniel requested every available security recording from the restaurant, the office hallway, the dining room, and the storage corridor leading toward the safe. The recordings began playing across several monitors. Managers carefully watched employees carrying donation boxes exactly according to policy. Emily appeared on screen placing the sealed container onto a rolling cart before immediately returning to assist customers at the front counter. The footage confirmed her timeline, but one problem remained. The office camera briefly lost its view after someone accidentally moved a tall stack of supply boxes in front of the lens while preparing for a delivery. Nearly 8 minutes of the room remained partially hidden. Melissa quietly folded her arms. "That is exactly when the count was taking place," she said. Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he replayed the surrounding footage several more times. He noticed employees entering and leaving the hallway, but nothing clearly explained the missing money. Most people would have accepted uncertainty as proof enough, yet Daniel refused to build conclusions upon missing information. Late that afternoon, Emily finished her shift and drove to the pharmacy to collect Ben's cough medicine before picking up the children from school. While organizing receipts inside her notebook that evening, Noah noticed a small folded paper tucked between 2 pages. "Mom," he said softly, "is this from work?" Emily looked at the receipt and immediately recognized it. Earlier that day, one of the donation boxes had developed a damaged security seal after a customer accidentally bumped the display stand. Following company procedure, Melissa had instructed Emily to obtain a replacement tamper seal from the office supply cabinet before the box was transferred. The register printed a time-stamped inventory receipt documenting the replacement, and Emily had slipped it into her notebook because she intended to file it with the shift paperwork before the confusion began. She stared at the printed time for several long seconds. The receipt showed the exact minute she had been standing at the front service counter requesting the replacement seal, several minutes before the missing funds could have disappeared inside the office. The following morning, Emily carefully placed the small receipt inside a clean envelope and carried it back to work. She did not know whether it would answer every question, but she believed the truth often survived inside the smallest details that everyone else overlooked. Emily Carter placed the neatly folded receipt on the conference table without saying a word. Daniel Brooks picked it up carefully while the restaurant managers gathered around the office. The small piece of paper looked ordinary, but the printed timestamp immediately drew everyone's attention. It showed that Emily had been requesting a replacement security seal for the donation box at the exact time the missing money was believed to have disappeared inside the office. Daniel compared the receipt with the register log, then with the inventory record, and finally with the electronic access report for the supply cabinet. Every document matched perfectly. Emily had been following company procedure in full view of both customers and employees while someone else had been inside the office. The room became completely silent. Daniel asked the information technology department to synchronize every available camera angle using the corrected timeline instead of the original estimate. When the recordings were aligned minute by minute, a detail that had seemed unimportant suddenly became impossible to ignore. During the brief period when the office camera was partially blocked by stacked supply boxes, one hallway camera still captured everyone entering and leaving through the side door. Melissa Grant appeared carrying the sealed donation box into the office, but several minutes later she quietly stepped back into the hallway holding a small paperwork folder before returning again. Daniel requested that the footage be enlarged. As the image became clearer, another overlooked detail appeared. Melissa had paused beside the coffee station where employees often placed temporary paperwork during busy shifts. Beneath the machine sat a folded deposit envelope that had not been listed during the first review. Daniel calmly instructed the managers to inspect the office exactly as it had appeared that evening. The envelope was still there, tucked behind a stack of unused forms that no one had noticed during the confusion. Inside were several folded bills together with an unfinished balancing worksheet in Melissa's handwriting. After several quiet conversations and a careful review of the accounting records, the truth finally emerged. Melissa admitted that she had accidentally created a cash shortage earlier in the week after recording one deposit incorrectly. Afraid that the mistake would damage the reputation she had spent years building, she convinced herself that moving money temporarily from the charity collection would allow her to correct the paperwork before anyone noticed. When the evening became unexpectedly busy and the totals no longer matched, panic replaced judgment. Seeing Emily's signature on the transfer log, Melissa allowed suspicion to drift toward the newest employee instead of immediately admitting her own mistake. Daniel listened without raising his voice. His disappointment showed more clearly than anger ever could. Emily remained silent until everyone turned toward her. She looked at Melissa for several long moments before speaking softly. "I do not want anyone humiliated because of me. I only want the truth to matter more than assumptions." Those words settled over the room with unexpected weight. Daniel slowly nodded. "Then that is exactly what we will protect." He announced immediate changes to the company's donation procedures, including additional verification steps, synchronized digital records, and mandatory dual confirmation before any charity funds could be moved. No employee, regardless of position, would ever again stand alone beneath suspicion because a system had failed to protect both honesty and accountability. As the meeting ended, Daniel quietly walked beside Emily toward the front entrance. Rain had begun falling again, gentle enough to soften every reflection across the parking lot. He looked toward the familiar corner where the old blue SUV had once spent so many nights. "You asked for one fair chance," he said. Emily smiled gently. "And you gave me one." Daniel shook his head with quiet gratitude. "No," he replied. "You showed all of us what a fair chance is supposed to look like." 1 year later, the October rain returned to Seattle with the same gentle rhythm that had once echoed across the roof of an aging blue SUV, but everything beneath that familiar sky had changed. The corner parking space where Emily Carter had quietly protected her family through countless uncertain nights no longer held a worn vehicle filled with folded blankets and whispered prayers. Instead, a small blue sign stood beside a row of reserved spaces that read, "Community Assistance Parking, created for families experiencing temporary hardship while they connected with local housing, employment, and family support organizations." It had begun as one conversation between two people who believed dignity should never depend upon a bank account, and it had quietly grown into something that reached far beyond a single restaurant. Emily no longer arrived before sunrise because she had nowhere else to sleep. She now drove from a modest apartment that her family proudly called home. Noah had joined his middle school science club and often talked about becoming an engineer. Lily still carried the same stuffed rabbit, although she had carefully sewn a new button eye onto it herself. Ben's little green dinosaur remained tucked inside his backpack, a reminder that hope sometimes arrived in the smallest hands. Emily had accepted a new position as Community Outreach Director for Daniel Brooks Regional Restaurant Group after months of proving both her leadership and her compassion. Rather than simply hiring people, she worked alongside local shelters, schools, healthcare providers, and employment agencies to help families rebuild stable lives with respect instead of pity. Every new employee who entered the program was reminded that assistance was never a gift of superiority. It was an investment in another person's opportunity to stand independently again. Daniel often visited community events without announcing his arrival. He preferred listening to families rather than standing behind podiums. During one autumn gathering outside the same McDonald's restaurant where everything had begun, children laughed beneath colorful tents while volunteers served warm meals and local organizations offered job resources, financial counseling, and temporary housing information. Emily moved easily from table to table, greeting each visitor by name whenever possible. She understood every anxious expression because she had once worn it herself. Near sunset, a weathered sedan quietly entered the parking lot and stopped near the familiar corner space. A young mother sat behind the steering wheel with two sleepy children in the back seat. She hesitated, uncertain whether she should leave before anyone noticed. Emily saw her through the restaurant window almost immediately. Without hesitation, she picked up 2 warm meals, a small folder of community resources, and an extra blanket that volunteers kept for emergencies. She walked slowly toward the vehicle with the same calm kindness that someone had once shown her. She did not ask uncomfortable questions. She did not assume anything about the woman's story. She simply smiled and said, "You do not have to figure everything out tonight." From beneath the entrance canopy, Daniel quietly watched the conversation unfold as gentle rain began falling once again. He realized that the greatest success of his career had never appeared on a financial statement or inside an annual report. It stood in that parking lot wearing a navy cardigan, offering another frightened family not money alone, but dignity, respect, and one fair chance. As evening settled across the city, Emily glanced toward the place where her old blue SUV had once waited through the longest nights of her life. She smiled, took the young mother's hand, and walked beside her toward a future that no longer seemed impossible. Money had built restaurants, but compassion had built something far more lasting, because one fair chance given with genuine kindness could become hope for countless strangers who had not yet been seen.